Today, we're diving into a historical puzzle, a real head-scratcher that stumped some of the sharpest minds of the early 20th century. You see, they were on a huge quest to find the real origin of religion, but what they actually found threatened to turn everything they thought they knew about human history completely upside down. Let's get into it.
So here's the mystery that started it all. Ethnologists were out there studying what they considered the most primitive cultures on Earth, people who'd been isolated for thousands and thousands of years. And in these places, they kept stumbling upon something that, according to their theories, just shouldn't be there: a belief in one single supreme being. A creator of everything. How on earth was that possible?
And look, this wasn't some minor detail they could just ignore. Not at all. It became a central problem that sparked a massive debate, and it's all captured right here in our source material. These scholars basically realized the facts on the ground just didn't fit their tidy theories. It forced them to come up with a whole new way of looking at the past. Okay, first, let's zero in on the discovery itself, the one that lit the match for this whole intellectual firestorm. I want you to just imagine for a second. It's 1910. You're an ethnologist, and you've traveled to the absolute ends of the earth. We're talking Australia, the very southern tip of South America. You're there to study people who you believe are a window into the dawn of humanity. And what do you find, tucked away in their oldest traditions? This fully formed idea of an all-father, a great creator god. It was just completely baffling. Now, to really get why this was such a bombshell, we need to understand the big theory of the day. It was this powerful idea that pretty much shaped the entire field of anthropology at the time. It was called the evolutionist method, and the core idea was, well, pretty simple. Human culture evolves just like a biological organism. They believed every single society was climbing the exact same ladder of progress. Some were just at the bottom, others were near the top, but it was all one ladder. And they had a very specific set of rungs on that ladder for religion. Belief was supposed to kick off with simple, so-called primitive ideas, things like magic or maybe worshiping ghosts. Then, over thousands of years, that would slowly evolve into worshiping many gods. That's polytheism. And only at the very, very top of the ladder, at the peak of civilization, only then were you supposed to get monotheism, the belief in one all-powerful god. And right here, you can see the problem laid bare. That old method on the left, it just had no way to explain finding a high god among nomadic hunter-gatherers. It was like finding a microchip in a dinosaur fossil. It broke the timeline. This crisis basically forced a whole new school of thought to come forward, the one on the right, the historical method. Its big idea? Cultures don't just evolve on their own little islands. They bump into each other, they share ideas, they're connected. So, a new crew of scholars, mostly based in Germany, came up with a pretty radical new way to look at the past. Their big light bulb moment was this: culture moves. Ideas, myths, beliefs, they don't just pop up out of thin air in different places. Nope, they're carried by people as people migrate across the globe. So instead of trying to cram every culture onto that one single ladder, these scholars became like cultural detectives, dusting for fingerprints and tracing the footprints of ideas to see where they actually came from. And this wasn't the work of just one guy. It started with thinkers like Friedrich Ratzel. He was the first to really argue that, hey, if two cultures thousands of miles apart have the exact same unique kind of bow or the same weird myth, it's probably not a coincidence. It's evidence of migration. Then Leo Frobenius took that idea and developed it into a full-blown theory of culture circles, or culture crises. And then Fritz Graebner came along and tried to apply it systematically to the entire planet. And this theory of culture circles, this is the key that really unlocked the whole puzzle for them. So what in the world is a Kulturkreis? Well, the idea is that cultural traits don't just wander around by themselves. A specific kind of fishing hook, for example, doesn't just travel solo. It travels with a certain way of building a hut, a specific set of myths about the ocean, a particular family structure, and, you guessed it, certain religious beliefs. They all move together as a single package. Honestly, the best modern analogy is a starter pack, When a group of people migrated out of their homeland thousands of years ago, they didn't just pack their bags. They took their entire cultural starter pack with them. And the whole goal of this historical method was to identify these original starter packs and then trace where in the world they ended up. And this is just brilliant because it shows they weren't just talking about this in the abstract. They were literally trying to map it. These are the actual diagrams from our source text. I mean, look at this. Scholars like our author tried to map all of human history as a series of these cultural layers spreading out, overlapping, and mixing. It was an incredibly ambitious project. So let's quickly break down their system. They saw history in layers. At the very bottom, you've got the oldest layer, what they called the primitive cultures. These are the original nomadic food gatherers. Then, on top of that, you get the primary cultures. Think the first farmers and herders. And finally, secondary cultures were formed whenever and wherever those primary groups met, mixed, and mashed up their ideas.
Okay, so we've got this new map of history. How does this all get us back to solving the big puzzle? Well, by retracing human history this way, these scholars landed on a pretty stunning answer to that original question about the creator god.
Just listen to this quote from Griebner himself. He's describing what his team found among the Aboriginal peoples in Southeast Australia. He talks about a god whose main job is being a creator, a first cause. I mean, this wasn't some nature spirit or an ancestral ghost. This was the classic definition of a high god, and they were finding it in what was supposed to be the most primitive culture on the planet. So the conclusion, well, it was staring them right in the face. If this belief in a supreme being was present in the oldest, most isolated cultures, then it must have been part of the oldest cultural layer of all, the original primitive culture circle of the very first humans. And that changes everything. This theory completely flipped that old ladder of progress right on its head. The belief in one god wasn't the final crowning achievement of civilized religion. It was, quite possibly, the starting point for humanity's entire religious journey. So why should we care about this century-old academic debate? Well, it was a revolutionary idea. First, it completely blew up the notion that there's just one single path of progress that every culture has to climb. Second, it suggested that one of our most powerful and profound ideas, the concept of a single creator, might actually be a shared inheritance from our most distant ancestors. It just fundamentally rewrote the story of us. And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. If this theory is even partly right, that big ideas travel in these starter packs passed down through history, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What powerful ideas, what deep-seated beliefs are part of our cultural starter pack today that we've just inherited without ever stopping to think about where they really came from?